This boy and girl are going to be well equipped when the time comes to take their places as worthy members of adult society.
Aloha, y'all. This is Daniel Eisenman, the host of the Breaking Normal podcast, where my guests are all invited based on the frequency of synchronicity, all done in person, and all trailblazers in the breaking of all things normal.
One of the things that Yovel did today is introduce me to a new friend, a new ally. I'm sitting across Miles Nichols. I think he messaged us yesterday, and we were able to squeeze in the show today before you're on the way to Golden. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. What you got going on in Golden today?
Looking at an office space.
All right. For your medical practice?
Yeah.
All right. So Miles Nichols, you are a doctor. What kind of doctor?
Doctor of acupuncture, oriental medicine.
And mental, what did you say?
And oriental.
Oh, oriental
medicine.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Acupuncture?
Yeah, DAOM.
Well, I'm happy that I didn't know that part. Yovel told me you're one of the most interesting people he's ever met. Did y'all connect at Burning Man?
We did, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Had you been to Burning Man before? Because that was
Yovel's
this
was like
first.
my fourth time.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did this one compare to your previous experiences?
I mean, always fantastic.
Okay.
Always fantastic.
I saw there looked like some pretty gnarly weather that hit. Were you there?
There was, yeah. So I got in on the Burner Express, which drove in exactly as it was raining, which they shut down the road, so couldn't get in. But luckily, because there were a bunch of people on the Burner Express, they said, hey, we'll let the bus go through. So we ended up sneaking by, getting in, walked in as it was raining, thought the camp might be in mayhem, but walked into a nice DJ set and dance party, everyone muddy and but it was great. The whole experience was awesome. There were challenges with weather and infrastructure, but didn't get in the way of having a great time.
Well, I have so much to talk to you about.
Yeah.
And who is Burning Man for if someone's never been? I know people have heard about it.
Yeah, probably not the faint of heart, but
not the faint of heart.
But the people who want to experience something that's going to push the edges a little bit, because I think most people are going to have what they experience as their edge pushed a bit. For me, it cultivates resiliency, and it's unlike anything else, so hard to explain what goes on there. And there's a lot of challenge. There's also a lot of beauty. There's also a lot of creativity. There's also a lot of opportunity to connect with people in a whole different way. I lead breath work there, so these breath practices, we do breath practices in cold showers for people, ice cold showers. And it's incredible the depth that people drop into there, because completely out of the normal environment, open, ready to experience something magical. And I find that the breathing sessions there, when we have a group of, often it'll be 40, 50 people doing breath work together, people go so deep so quickly, emotional responses, incredible profound experiences. People can drop in really quickly and have a great time.
All right, you said a lot of things. I like what you meant, how you said how out of normal this environment is. How important do you think it is to take ourselves out of our normal environment, and why?
Yeah, well, as a functional medicine doctor, one of the things that I look at is what's some of the obstacles to health and wellness. And the number one that I actually like to talk about is comfort being the enemy. And the reason comfort's the enemy to health and wellness is not because it's not helpful to be comfortable at times. It is. But we live in a world where comfort's we don't have the same issues with dealing with temperature changes because we control the environment from temperature. We don't have the same challenge dealing with weather because we control the environment for being indoors. We don't have the same kind of experiences being challenged with hunting and gathering because we can go to the store. There are a lot of things that have become really, really great in a sense of comfort, but what that does is that creates an inability to adapt. And we're starting to learn so much about the capacity for the human organism to benefit from hormetic stress, which is like a healthy stress, a stress that's pushing us a little bit but not over the edge. And that has been lost today. It's part of why things like saunas and cold plunges are showing so much health benefit. It's part of why I believe that experiences like Burning Man can provide enormous mental health and physical health benefits for people, because it does get out of the comfort zone. And it is impossible. Even if you bring an RV and you try to be comfortable at Burning Man, you're not going to be comfortable all the time. I don't know anyone who said, oh, I had a really comfortable experience at Burning Man. No. But that getting out of the comfort zone but being safe still, and still surviving that experience and coming out on the other end, having gone through a challenge and a struggle. I remember I was living in Jamestown, up in the mountains northwest of Boulder, and I was driving home one day. It was raining hard, and I got home, I went to sleep, and no cell phones there, pretty out in the mountains. And about 2 a.m, I get a call on the landline. And I'm like, who's calling me at 2 a.m? I don't even give out this landline number except to family. Is there an emergency going on? I answer, and it's a recorded message, and it says, flash flooding imminent, seek higher ground. And it repeats, flash flooding imminent, seek higher ground. No one there, nothing I can ask questions about. It just says flash flooding imminent, seek higher ground. So I pop my head out, but it's nighttime, it's raining hard, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm on higher ground, I'm in the mountains, so, I'm just going back to sleep. I wake up in the morning, I walk out, and I go across the street, and I look down where the river had been, and where the stream had been, and it just tore houses. I saw this house that the wall was off. I could look inside like a dollhouse. Another house where it was with just the roof on the ground. There were propane tanks floating down the creek. The creek had rerouted itself down Main Street, and it was total mayhem. The roads were destroyed. There was no way out, and now it was survival mode. So I'd collected some rainwater, so we were boiling rainwater because the water plant had been destroyed. And we were there for 3 days before we got a notice that they were going to send helicopters to take us out. And we could bring one bag, and they had no idea when we'd be able to get back to our home, anything else, car, nothing. So I got a bag packed up, I got on a helicopter, I got flown out of there, and experiences like this are ones that they're tragic. It was horrible for a lot of people. And the community did survive, and there was this bonding that occurred after having gone through that together. And so that could easily have been a traumatic stress experience, or it could have been a traumatic growth experience. And I found it for myself and for a number of others there who had the perspective to shift for it to be a growth experience. I learned so much from being dislocated from my home, having to figure out where to live, and a whole lot of other things that happened as a result of an experience that was not comfortable at all. But I'm so glad now that it happened, because I grew so much from that, and it led to so many subsequent things that I would have probably never had happen otherwise.
What year was that? Oh, that sounds crazy.
2013.
Holy
Yeah, they said it was like a 1,000-year flood. It was totally...
Is that when Boulder Creek flooded as well?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I hear stories about that because I live pretty close to Boulder Creek, and people show me like, see that line on that tree? That used to be underwater in that 2013 flood. Holy mackerel.
Yeah.
Wow, what an experience. And the idea of learning or like bonding through survival. I think I've heard this concept in the book Tribes. Have you heard of this book by Junger? Someone with last name Junger. He was just talking about how like through these traumatic cultural experiences, how even like through wars, that sometimes families felt more connected than they ever had. Yeah. And the health of the community that like birthed through such a traumatic experience. It sounds like y'all had a dose of that there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Burning Man can provide that kind of context where in your camp or with your group that you're with there, with your tribe, let's say, then they're surviving the challenging weather, surviving the infrastructure challenges together provides an opportunity. And that opportunity could go either way. It could go towards mayhem, or it could go towards connection. It could go towards feeling a stronger bond. It could go towards growing together. And when there's I'd love to have someone study more what's the difference between experiences that become post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic growth, but I feel there's a real opportunity to grow from these challenging experiences, especially when you're in it together with a group of people.
Yeah, I feel like that's a cloudy line because you mentioned hunting and gathering, and my hunting experiences, some of them have been traumatic.
Yeah.
Just even the taking the life of an animal and like seeing its guts, and like especially of a pig once I did, and I was like, man, that looks so human.
Yeah.
It reminded me, the closest thing I could connect it with is when I saw my daughter birthed.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure because there was like a portal that I was in or what, but they were both extremely traumatic in a way and extremely growth inducing. Yeah. And I definitely, I trust in my interpretation, although there was some trauma, it was a growth trauma, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I hear you in that line, and I am a big avid cold plunger and breath worker, and I do feel like that's like the safest way to almost induce that stress in a growth type of way.
And that's key, safe way to induce these challenges, because obviously there was a time in history where cold was so significant that there were people dying of hypothermia, and cold became clearly a pathogenic issue that was killing people. But when in controlled doses, there's this capacity. For me, it's like getting into the cold. There's this, everything in my body goes into this survival experience. And if I can, with my mind and with my focus, if I can consciously relax when everything in the physiology is going into a stress response, that metaphorically to me helps when I get the call that something's happened, someone's passed on, some stuff's going down that's hard and challenging and stressful, and my body starts to go into a stress response. If I've trained my mind to be able to, when my body goes into a stress response, to slow my breathing, long exhales, to relax consciously, even when there's that physiologic signaling of stress, that to me is training for life. It's training for the unpredictable. It's training for taking me out of my comfort zone and learning to relax in the unknown. And that to me is a huge capacity to help deal with life.
Well, I'll affirm that. For me, I've had an extremely busy day.
Yeah.
And it could be stressful, but I prioritize certain things that make it growthful instead. So, even with my ridiculous schedule that I'm not sure how I'm going to get everything done today, I made sure I went and did some breath work in the sun.
Yep.
And I did a little workout.
Yep.
And I got in the creek.
Yeah.
Before coming here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that sounds like something we both, maybe Yavel, intuited that we have this connection here. How can we get other people to understand the profound benefits of making this a part of your rituals?
Well, I come from a medical background where I look at studies, and I hated cold growing up. Like as a kid, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. It's hot there. It's really hot. And I was the kid who was in the swimming pool in the summer getting blue lips because for whatever reason, just cold, I didn't like cold at all. I wasn't interested in cold. And it was a challenge. It was a real challenge for me. And when I started to look at some of the research, and that's for me, maybe other people resonate, maybe they don't, but I started to see that there's this incredible, there was a study that looked at cold water swimmers, and it found in 23 seconds, there was more than a doubling in norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is a precursor to dopamine. So you flood norepinephrine, and that was one of the original antidepressant drugs, is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor where it made that norepinephrine last longer in the brain. And it was an antidepressant drug because that norepi has a pathway to convert into dopamine. And dopamine has to do with reward and drive and motivation. So you're setting things up with even just 23 seconds in this study. And the interesting thing was when they first started the study and they had these cold water swimmers starting the experience, they also got a lot of cortisol, which cortisol is a stress hormone that doesn't always offer benefits. I mean, complex, and I'm not going to get into the complexities of it, but I'll say that too much cortisol for too long is a problem. Too little is a problem also. But we don't want to push cortisol ongoingly. Interestingly, after just a few days, that shock stopped raising cortisol, but it kept raising norepi. So norepinephrine kept raising. And in the beginning, people do get that cortisol spike, but once the shock goes away of the experience of getting into the cold, you get the norepi without the cortisol. And that gives a lot of precursor to dopamine. And it's pretty rare to find something that gives enough precursor to dopamine to last for 2 to 5 hours afterwards of increased dopamine without the kind of, a lot of people's dopamine experiences are doing things that are a quick rise in dopamine and then a quick drop. You have a sugar or a sweet or something that is an instant pleasure, or a ding on the phone or a social media something, and it spikes dopamine, and then you get a withdrawal from it. It's not a sustained release over a longer period of time. But when I read that and I found that cold had that capacity, I decided for myself for 2 reasons. One, I hated it as a kid. I knew it would have opportunity for me to grow. And then 2, that if I learned to do it, I'd also have sustained dopamine, and that's hard to do for anything in looking even at supplements and medications, and it's not easy to get sustained dopamine, and dopamine is such a problem in the world today where people seek out hits of dopamine but have drops too low, and it creates a lot of problems with being able to stay focused, with being able to be productive, with being able to have the drive in life. So for me, cold is something that really offers both metaphoric benefits psychologically to relax in the face of stress, but also physiologic benefits for mitochondria, for dopamine, for a lot of other physiologic processes when it's done in controlled doses and safely.
Amen. And to circle back to the beginning, what you told me, you practice acupuncture? Is that are you still doing that?
So primarily I practice functional medicine.
Okay.
And acupuncture is kind of something that I'll give people optionally in a session if they're there anyway, but the main thing is functional medicine at this point.
Okay. Well, I do believe a lot of times what's most personal can be most universal. And when I was going through a personal crisis, I actually didn't know this, but someone very important was lying to me. And I ended up getting vertigo. And I didn't know what the heck. I heard about vertigo, but I'm like, this is vertigo. Like, I can't believe I was getting so concerned. I was like thinking about getting a CAT scan.
Yeah.
It was scary. And then, so I was praying, trying all kinds of things. And I got some acupuncture done from a lady named Talia in Encinitas, California. I have no idea if you know her.
I don't.
And she gave me some Chinese herbs and acupuncture. And at that point, I became a believer in acupuncture.
Yeah.
And I don't know what exactly happened.
Yeah.
Could you explain what may have happened to me there?
Yeah, I mean, acupuncture has this long history, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and it's one of these tried and true, tested through time modalities. And when we're trying to explain it from a Western mindset, it's a little harder. There's a book by a guy named Ted Kapchuk that's a good place to start for people if they really want to understand more. The web has no weaver, but there's certainly something about putting a needle into an area and there's a whole energetic system. There are meridians, there are acupoints, there's a lot going on here, but there are also empiric studies that know that when you put needles in certain areas, you stimulate the nerves, you change the electrical conductivity. There's a lot of things that can happen, and it's so well proven that for certain things like pain, for example, that the military started to put acupuncturists onto medevac planes, and they would reduce opiate use by more than 50% just by doing auricular or ear acupuncture to help control those pain signals. So there's a lot that acupuncture can do. It's an amazing modality. For me, I'm a little bit more interested in helping people to do things for themselves, which is why I don't do quite as much of that. I consider acupuncture a procedure. It's a procedure that helps a person to get out of imbalance. But what I love to do is I love to help people to be able to do things for themselves, which is why functional medicine is a little more my focus. And I still love acupuncture. It's a great tool to have, and it really can be helpful for a lot of different ailments.
Yeah. And is it is there any connection? Like, what do you think may have been happening to me? Because I did find out this person was lying to me 6 months later. But I was in a state of vertigo for like 10 days until I got this acupuncture done.
Yeah.
Is there an explanation of, because I don't know about the energy systems or how that may have worked?
Yeah. Well, vertigo has to do with the inner ear, and sometimes it has to do with stuff getting stuck there. But it also can have to do with, I like to look at mind-body corollaries. So I do like to look at how consciousness and physiology interface together. And if there's something disorienting in your experience, this person lying to you in this case, that disorientation may translate into a physiologic manifestation, and you may have this experience of vertigo. And the experience of vertigo on that consciousness level of disorientation, acupuncture can help to reorient. It can help to create coherency in yourself so that you're no longer disoriented in your own body, in your own experience, in your consciousness, so that whether this person is disorienting you, you're more stable to be able to stay in yourself, if that makes sense.
It was a trippy experience. I'm remembering more now that I talk about it. I remember she actually, the person that was not telling me the truth, I did some energy work with me at one point where I had a vision of like Jesus and a snake and like shattered cathedral windows.
Yeah.
And then that's like when something popped. I had almost had like a panic attack. And then like when I accepted something with Jesus and the snake, and then combined with this acupuncture, everything went away. Like all the symptoms went away.
Yeah.
And then I found out literally mentally, I'm like, oh my gosh, now you're telling me this? This is maybe what I was so dizzy about.
Yeah.
Back then.
Makes sense.
What is the name of your website or practice if someone wants to follow? Or
Called Medicine with Heart.
Medicine with Heart.
Yeah.
.com?
Yeah.
Okay. And what does that look like for you currently? What is that about?
So there are two big clientele that come in. One who's experiencing chronic health challenges that are difficult to understand. I train other providers to have an institute that trains providers in functional medicine. So we get a lot of referrals for the cases that maybe they've tried conventional medicine, they maybe tried some functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, they maybe tried some acupuncture, they've tried different things, and there's still a mystery. It's still not resolved. And we look a lot at environment and infections and methylation and mitochondrial function, and we look at microbiome and gut issues, and we do a lot of labs to figure out what are the underlying root causes of what might be contributing to these issues that haven't been discovered so far in a person's health journey. So there's a lot of people who come in. For example, just yesterday I was with a patient who she's struggling and dealing with these mini strokes, and she's only 32, and it's been going on for a couple of years. She can't even care for her kids. Her kids are with grandparents right now, and she's not sure if she can even make it. And it's this kind of case, these super complex cases, we get a lot of those because she went to a different clinic and they said, you're in a complex situation, let's send you to Dr. Miles because we just specialize in dealing with these really complex situations. So multiple autoimmune issues, Lyme disease, mold illness, environmental toxicity, unexplained and mystery issues, thyroid, gut, autoimmune are big focuses in the clinic. That's one side. The other side are people who don't have specific health challenges but are interested in optimization, longevity. We have a focus on helping people to optimize, and we can look at a lot of biomarkers that do the latest and greatest in imaging with AI analysis and look at methylation, mitochondrial function, look at the markers or the hallmarks of aging and help people to understand where they're at in the spectrum of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease. So we look at the heart, we look at the mind, we look at the body composition, we look at these variables that we've seen to be associated with the ways in which people pass on. Because 100 years ago, it was a whole different picture. 100 years ago, the 7 of the top 10 causes of death were acute issues. They were acute issues. And they were things like tuberculosis and gallbladder attacks and typhoid and things that modern medicine has done a great job at solving. But now 7 of the 10 top causes of death are chronic diseases. And most doctor visits, over 75% are for chronic diseases. And most medications manage but don't resolve the causes of those chronic diseases. So we're dealing with an epidemic where chronic disease has become the predominant force, and conventional medicine isn't set up to deal with all the chronic diseases very well. So those that aren't serviced well often fit with going into our practice.
Wow, that was a great explanation. You reminded me too. I brought a few gifts for you.
Oh, cool.
I'll see if they resonate with you.
Yeah.
I want to see what you have to say about them. This is our newest product. This is pure bison testicles.
Awesome.
Freeze dried raw.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Do you think people can? I think there's gonna be testosterone in that powder if we tested it.
Mm-hmm.
Am I absorbing that in a way or not?
Or,
a lot of people have been asking me if I've been using TRT since I've been taking this.
Yeah.
I've not.
Yeah. So, again, there's time-tested use and use cases for consuming things like testicles even and organs of animals. And it's very clear that those have an effect in the body. Now, when it comes to testosterone specifically, the oral bioavailability is fairly low. So the levels, if we're looking at a lab report and we're looking at your testosterone levels and you start taking something like this that might have some small levels of testosterone in it and they're taken orally, we wouldn't expect to see a huge jump in your testosterone levels. However, there's probably a lot of other cofactors and things that are not quite fully understood at this point that might impact the same things that testosterone impact.
Mm-hmm.
But if in the clinic when people are utilizing testosterone, topical application or injectable get blood levels up way quicker than an oral testosterone, even if we're doing straight testosterone. But oral testosterone has a use case and sometimes prevents some issues that come with exogenous testosterone use, like you'll shut off the endogenous signaling from the brain when you take exogenous testosterone. So at a certain level, you shut off your internal production. The brain stops signaling to the testes to make more because you're taking it.
Okay.
But that doesn't tend to happen with oral. Because oral is such a small signal, you don't shut off the brain production. So you still typically will have brain production, internal production in the testes, brain signaling to the testes to produce. And you'll still have that internal production, and you'll have a little bit on top of that. So you don't get the testicular atrophy, you don't get some of the things, the infertility issues that might come from taking exogenous testosterone.
Yeah, I mean, that super resonates why I'm such a big believer in distributing foods.
Yeah.
Because that's just food in there.
Yeah.
And this is the other one. This is actually a bit of an invention. This is my jar I've been using.
Yeah.
It's 100% grass-fed bison bones, slow simmered in spring water,
Great.
and then freeze dried off.
Amazing.
So it's freeze-dried bison bone broth.
Awesome.
And most bone broth powders you'll get is going to be like a spray dry.
Yeah.
And they'll have other things added.
Yep.
We just slow simmered that in spring water from
Amazing.
the mountains, and that's it. And that goes really good with coffee.
Yeah.
So we call it femur creamer. So these are for you.
Awesome.
And then I also have a bunch of questions preloaded that we could try to answer quickly. Is there anything you want to make sure that we address or say before we dive into these?
I mean, I'll just say with supplementation, because I also formulate, and I'm a chief formulator and director of education for a professional brand supplement company. So I do a lot of research when it comes to supplements and to be able to take things that are going to actually move the needle and make a difference. And so happy to delve into anything in that spectrum. And it's fantastic that you're doing products like these, because there's a lot of capacity for, in the world today, people to have a lot of confusion about what is meaningful, what's actually helpful, what's just fluff. There's a lot there. And so happy to dive into that. And happy to talk a little bit about environment too, because environmentally acquired illness is something that I think is underappreciated. I'm writing a book on microplastics and nanoplastics right now. And so I have a lot to say about those kinds of things, as well as other environmental things that are making people ill that often go under recognized. And that's a huge part when people come in and they say, hey, I've been doing all the right things on my diet, my lifestyle, my sleep, my exercise. I've been taking supplements. I've been doing work on my gut. I've been doing probiotics. I've been doing all the things right that I know to do right, and I'm still fatigued. I'm still brain fogged. I'm having these neurologic symptoms. You know, that's my story. Back when I was in my early 20s, I was struggling with chronic fatigue. So happy to go anywhere into any of that terrain.
Awesome. I definitely think some of my popcorn questions are going to cover that, but
Cool.
maybe not the microplastic thing. This is a whole new conversation. And, you know, I've heard, you know, speaking of testicles and other organs, there are people showing up with microplastics in their organs, in the testicles and beyond. I mean, how are people determining that, and what does that mean, and what do we do about this?
Well, we could talk for the whole time about that. So one study that I really like to reference around this was a fairly recent study. It was an autopsy study, and they had just over 90 people they autopsied, and they were looking at microplastics levels. They looked at kidneys, livers, and brains.
Okay.
So they looked kidneys, livers, brains, and what percent would you guess that microplastics were detectable in livers, kidneys, and brains?
I mean, I would hope that it's like less than 0.1%, less than 0.01%. I mean, I would hope it's just negligible. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the hope. But it's 100%.
What do you mean?
100%.
Every
single kidney, liver, and brain had detectable microplastics in the tissue.
Okay.
So it was autopsies, so these people have already passed on, and they're taking their organs and they're testing for microplastics. 100% in the livers, 100% in the kidneys, 100% in the brains had significant levels of microplastics. And the levels in the brain, this is alarming, were 10 times on average the levels in the kidneys or the livers.
That would almost make sense because the liver and the kidneys are more filtering organs, but I'm not sure. Like, they don't store toxins; they filter them.
Well, the brain doesn't ideally store
toxins.
I know.
So, like, so what's this? Yeah. What do we do? And what do they mean? They're like looking at a microscope, or like, do you understand how they're like seeing these microplastics?
Yeah. So there are assays. Where you can look for microplastics in tissue, and they're able to actually find micro and nanoplastics and the levels of those micro and nanoplastics, and that's why we can quantify it and say 10 times more in the brains than the livers and the kidneys.
What about like people from hundreds of years ago? Is there any comparison by chance? Did they test for microplastics back then?
No. This is more recent technology to be able to test for microplastics, so we don't know, but we would assume it was dramatically less.
And that makes me wonder about like animals, like whales and pigs, and you know, think about that.
Well, so certainly microplastics are in the oceans. They're in pretty much, they're pretty ubiquitous today. It's all over the place. There's exposure to microplastics and nanoplastics. And the brains of the people, so there were about 12 people in this study who died with Alzheimer's or dementia in their brains. Those brains of those 12 individuals, as compared to the brains of the ones who didn't die with dementia, Alzheimer's, were 10 to 20 times more than the brains of the people who didn't have Alzheimer's dementia. So not only 10 times as much microplastic in the brain on average, but then tenfold on top of that to 20-fold for those who died with Alzheimer's dementia. Now, this is what we call a correlation. So we're not saying necessarily that the microplastics caused the dementia or Alzheimer's. They can't say that from that study, but it's very suspicious that we had a 10 to 20x on average level of microplastics in the brains that were demented.
Yeah, that is. So what's the theories around this, and what do we do about it? Like, why are these people storing more microplastics? Is it purely exposure, or is it something with their metabolism, or both? Or?
Yes, and yes. Yeah. So again, the data is limited, but what we do know is we know for sure that there are a lot of exposures to micro and nanoplastics, and those exposures are a little different than most people might assume. There's a lot that is in water, and you might think, okay, well, bottled water that's in plastic, but it's not just that. Tap water, even bottled glass water, has a substantial amount of micro and nanoplastics. And it's
the bottled glass water that might, let's say, for instance, they're coming from bottled at the source. of a spring? Or do those have microplastics?
It depends. So if they have that metal top
yeah.
that has that little plastic.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Those actually can sometimes have more.
But who doesn't have a glass bottle with that little plastic top on?
I think Mountain Springs maybe is one of the only ones, or there are some metal bottles that have metal tops without the little white insert. But yeah, so it's a challenge. It's a challenge because then, if you say, oh, I'm not going to drink bottled water, I'll drink tap water. Well, tap water unfortunately has a lot of micro nanoplastics in it as well, even in the U.S. They did a comparison. So there was a study that looked at different countries, and U.S. didn't look great. It didn't look great. It was kind of comparable almost to India in terms of how much microplastics in the water. It's shocking, too. There's some pictures of these magnified microplastics, and you see they're colored like little filaments, like blue and red filaments of microplastics that are in the water. So it's a big issue, and part of the nanoplastics are even more of a concern because nano means the particle size is small enough to make it through cell membranes.
So what's giving nanoplastics versus microplastics?
Well, as plastics break down, they become smaller and smaller. And so the nanoplastics are the smallest of the plastics. And because they're so small, there's a lot of nano emulsifications and technology in the pharmaceutical industry where they're taking nanoparticles in order to deliver them to the brain, in order to deliver them to cells, because they can make it through the blood-brain barrier, they can make it into tissues. So it's alarming because those nanoplastics we're exposed to them, so they can get through the gut barrier, through the brain barrier, into cells, and that's probably part of why we're getting this accumulation, this bioaccumulation of these microplastics in the organs, the tissues, the brain.
Are there any supplements or devices out there yet that take out microplastics and nanoplastics to people? Have you heard of these?
Probably, but not yet research validated. So what we know about micro nanoplastics is that it can get into tissue. We know that there are some things that can bind to microplastics, nanoplastics, but that might be localized to the gut. How do we get them out of tissues, cells? Here's one point of confusion. People talk about forever chemicals. So in some plastics, we have these forever chemicals. We get exposed to these forever chemicals, and they're like, well, you can't get rid of them, can you? And that's a confusion that I like to clear up for people, that just because the chemical is a forever chemical and it never breaks down doesn't mean we can't get it out of the body. It may never break down, but it doesn't mean we can't get it out. Now, can I say that we have a proven method to get it out? Not yet, but I hope that we will. And what I can say is that there are mechanisms by which it's plausible to upregulate phases of liver detoxification, transport proteins that take toxins out of cells, bind and remove toxins with bile that probably will lower the burden. And there is a blood test for microplastics, so you can see the level, do some things, and then check the level again. So there is that. Oh, wow. And because there's that gives a pathway to research what we might be able to do to remove and lower the burden of microplastics and nanoplastics stored in the body.
Well, I mean, one thing here is, as you can see, everything's in glass.
Yeah.
And I am a big believer in that.
Yeah.
This doesn't make things cheaper or easier by any means, but one of the reasons this supplement company exists is because I wanted these. I wanted this in this quality, and it doesn't exist until now.
Yeah.
So anyways,
microplastics. I'll share one more kind of alarming thing about microplastics, then we can move on. But there's another study where they take plaque. So as people develop heart disease, atherosclerosis, you get plaquing of the arteries, and the carotid artery is one place where plaquing occurs. And so there's a procedure to remove plaque for people who are far along in atherosclerosis, and they'll scrape the plaque out of the carotid artery.
Wow, I think I've heard about this, man.
So one of the labs said, we're going to take some of this plaque, and we're going to look at the plaque and see how much microplastics are in the plaque. And what they did is they assessed for the level of microplastic in the plaque, and they followed these people for a long time. Now, when they adjusted for the level of plaque, which is the main risk for cardiovascular disease is the amount of plaque. So when they adjust for that, what they found is that the plaque that had the people whose plaque had the most microplastics had a significant increase. It was about 30% or more increase in events, cardiovascular events, as compared to the same level of plaque, but less microplastic in that plaque. So again, this is correlation, but it's starting to say, well, hey, what we know about cardiovascular risk is the more plaque, the more risk. But now we're saying the same plaque with more microplastics may have more risk. And so this is a very compelling study to show us that there may be more than just that microplastics are there. There may actually increase risk for dementia, Alzheimer's. They may increase risk for cardiovascular disease. And certainly there's evidence of contributing to hormone problems as well.
All right, so someone like my dad that listens to this, he's probably gonna be like, so what do I do to stop getting microplastics in me?
I mean, the first thing is reduce exposure. That's always first, is reduce exposure. So filtering water using something like reverse osmosis gets rid of a vast majority of the microplastics, and water is probably the biggest source of exposure for people. There's a lot of sources. Food's a source. Clothing can be a source. You can breathe microplastics in if it's in the air, and it may actually, there's a lot of sources for microplastics, nanoplastics, but by far and away, liquids are the main source. So if you can reduce that, if I have to give one thing, is work as hard as you can to exclusively drink liquids that are reverse osmosis and that are in metal or glass bottles. I mean, this mug here, I even chose it specifically because it's got a metal piece and not the plastic lid. I mean, it's a plastic lid.
And it has a silicone thing on the outside. What do you think about that? Because I've seen these are the coffee makers. I'm like, I don't know if I want hot water to go with the silicone.
So silicone can have some chemicals in it as well, but it won't leach microplastics in the same way. So there's some... you have to pick your battles. There's no elimination of exposure in today's world. I think we had an exercise for people to do to say, hey, can you for 1 week eliminate all exposure to plastics? And if people do this exercise, basically impossible. They look at all their products. They look at what's bottled in plastic. They look at what they buy from the grocery store and what's in plastic. It's all pretty much impossible. So that's why we have to triage and say, okay, what's the biggest source? It's water. Let's start there.
What do you do with your water? Like, what's your personal?
Yeah, so we have a 14-stage reverse osmosis filter.
At your house?
At our house.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I bring it with. I bring it with in glass or in metal bottle.
And is this like on a well or is it city water?
It's a well.
It's a well.
Yeah.
So you're doing that filtering to a well.
Yes.
Now, what do you think about bottling spring water in a glass bottle?
And it's partly because the groundwaters have been contaminated as well. So that's why we're seeing it a lot in the tap. Sorry, what'd you?
I personally aim to go to springs.
Of course.
Ideally with a glass bottle. Sometimes it's one of those BPA-free bottles.
Yeah.
What do you think? Are there micro and nanoplastics in spring water?
Less so, because spring typically is closer to surface. The deeper you go in ground, the more exposure potential. So spring water is pretty good, typically.
I also, the mineral, I feel like it's more alive, especially if I drink it freshly harvested.
Yeah, when I was living in Jamestown, I was really close to the Indian Peaks spring, and I would just go... I'd take a glass carboy, a 6-gallon glass carboy, and just fill the spring.
That takes some concentration, especially if it's slippery outside.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just fill that with spring water and use that, but I'm not close to a spring now.
Okay. All right. Well, you want to try some of these popcorn questions?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Because I think we're about 44 minutes in, as usual, and I think we got about at least 20 here with you. All right. So here we go.
Rapid fire.
You walked the path from chronic fatigue in your 20s to helping thousands heal. When was the exact moment you realized I'm not going back to normal, and what changed?
Well, in my early 20s, I was struggling with chronic fatigue and brain fog enough that it was getting in the way of my education. Because I got called into the principal's office, and I was sitting there with Valerie, and she was saying, hey, it's gotten to the point where it's affecting your ability to get through school, because it was mostly arriving late, and my early morning teacher was one who would close the door and lock it. And
was this at college? Or?
This was in the acupuncture medical school. So they were fairly strict on their attendance policy. And so she said, you're getting great grades, you're doing great in school, but we got this policy and what's going on? And I said, well, I'm having trouble waking up in the morning. Doesn't matter if I got 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours of sleep. Sometimes I'll feel more tired. I'll sleep through my alarm sometimes. And she's like, I think something's medically going on. And I said, well, I think so too. But, we're getting acupuncture and doing all this stuff. I'd gone to the doctor and they told me everything looks good on my labs. Maybe I'm depressed, but I don't feel depressed. So I don't know what's going on. And she said, well, go see a sleep specialist, figure this out. So I went to see a sleep specialist and I got a diagnosis. The diagnosis was not that useful. It was delayed circadian rhythm syndrome, which is to bed later, awake later. But it gave me accommodations to make my way through school, but it didn't resolve the issue for me. It didn't give me the energy. It didn't give me the normal ability to adjust my sleep cycle. And so it really created an impetus in me to say, because before that I was looking in the mirror and I was like, am I cut out for this? Should I just give up on pursuing advanced education? Should I just get a job, do something that I don't really want in my heart to do? Should I just give up? And so I was having these kinds of questions. And I was feeling bad about it because I thought, well, my dad was a doctor. He went to an Ivy League school. My mom went to an Ivy League school and got her PhD. My brother went to an Ivy League school.
They all go to the same Ivy League school?
So Stanford, my parents met at Stanford. Okay. And my brother went to Stanford for undergrad, but he went to Yale for law school. Okay. And then my sister went to a school that's probably harder to get into even than Stanford, a little school in Pennsylvania, a liberal arts school. And then she went on to get her PhD after. And so I thought, what the heck is going on? Why can't I keep up? What's going on here? And so finally, when Valerie called me into the office, I was like, I got to figure this out. She gave me that impetus to, there is something that you can figure out here. And so although her suggestion to go to a sleep specialist didn't help me figure it out, it gave me time to figure it out. And I started going to all the people I could think of, including energy workers, Tibetan healers, all kinds of things, naturopaths, everything I could think of to try to figure this out. And eventually I found a functional medicine mentor. And that's a part of where I started to look at research myself. I started to look at my labs with more scrutiny. I realized that my thyroid, while it wasn't from conventional medicine hypothyroid, it was out of the functional range. And so my thyroid stimulating hormone would be in the 3s, even 4s. And in conventional medicine, they said nothing's wrong with your thyroid. But what we know from looking at functional medicine studies is if we exclude people who have risk for thyroid issues, really 2.5 or even maybe 2 is probably the upper end for TSH that would indicate a healthy thyroid function. So I started reading papers about, okay, if there's maybe a thyroid issue, then what causes thyroid issues? And it was very clear that it's mostly an autoimmune issue, but that it's linked also to the gut. So I read a paper that said that H. pylori can contribute to thyroid issues. And so I did a stool analysis for H. pylori. I did 2. The first one showed negative. The second one showed positive. Treated that, and that started my journey. It didn't help everything, but it started my journey to, there are some things that can be done here. And after a lot of trial and tribulation and doing a bunch of practices, Qigong was a big part of my practices and meditation, and then doing different diet and lifestyle things, I finally was able to, with some labs, figure out some things that were going on. I realized I had some chronic infections. That I didn't know this until much later, but there were ticks in the dog yard, and my parents had to stop having dogs for a little while in order to let the ticks clear out of there. And I hadn't even known that or realized that. But I found antibodies against tick-borne infections. And then I was living in a place in Golden, and we found some mold behind the dryer. And then I started investigating environmentally acquired illness. And I did a genetic screen that found that I had what's called a multi-susceptible gene, which is susceptible to mold toxins and toxins from Lyme and toxins from certain other infections, where my immune system wouldn't recognize and get rid of them like a normal immune system would. And this is actually about 24% of the population that have this genetic predisposition. So between that, I got out of that environment. I got into a better environment. I did all the things to get rid of the stored toxin in my body, to work on the infections. I found antibodies against certain cells in my stomach. I treated that. And then I started feeling dramatically better. And I thought, wow, this took a long time. This was not easy. I need to help other people to simplify this and make it more step by step, because this was crazy to figure out.
Wow. Well, that explains a lot. That gene, that's pretty fascinating. But you're saying certain people have a gene that makes it harder to like detox from mold or Lyme exposure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that makes a lot of sense, because there's people that I know that seem to be really potentially messed up from Lyme and or mold.
Yep.
But why aren't other people near them that might be living with them?
Yeah. So there is a genetic predisposition, and there's a bunch of other variables that go into that. And sometimes those genes turn on or off too. So the same person can be in an environment doing well, and then they get, let's say, an infection, like a viral infection, and that acts like a priming event. It turns on those genes, and now they're reacting to their environment when they weren't before. And then they start to get these issues.
Wow. Where do you think Lyme disease comes from?
I don't know. So, obviously ticks carry it, but where it originated, so Lyme, Connecticut is sort of the epicenter. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Lyme, part of Connecticut?
Well, it's called Lyme.
That's the name of the town?
The town, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How close is that to Hartford, I wonder? Anyways,
I don't know. But and there was a lab offshore that was doing medical research, and so I'm not going to make any claims about where Lyme might have come from, but there was certainly a lab doing experiments on insects and animals, and some people wonder if it might have originated there. But we know that Lyme, Connecticut was an epicenter, and we know it's one of the fastest growing infectious diseases. The CDC keeps upping how many reported cases per year, and we know reported cases aren't getting the total. And it's East Coast all the way to West Coast. The Bay Area Lyme Foundation is showing a lot of ticks in California near the ocean, in the brush near the ocean, are carrying Lyme. So it's coast to coast, and different areas have different levels of exposure, but we certainly know that there's a lot more exposure than a lot of people think.
Ooh, that's a mysterious one.
Yeah.
I think I remember listening to a podcast with Tucker Carlson where he was interviewing some lady that was apparently a part of that research.
Yeah.
She was making some claims. I'm not even sure if I want to hear much more about this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So medicine with heart. It integrates functional labs, meditation, breath work, behavior design. Which pillar surprised you the most when you applied it personally, and why?
Well, for me, the practice, certain movement practices, meditation practices, breathwork practices, cold exposure, these kinds of things that are, they're accessible, they're not expensive, they're fairly basic, but man, it makes such a difference. And these movement practices, some of them are just tremendous, and I've noticed incredible benefit. When I started doing movement practices and meditation practices regularly and going to retreats and diving deep in that, I made some huge internal changes, and those internal changes were followed by physiologic and external changes. And so I went at it from the inside out in that perspective, but I think it's totally underappreciated, the level of impact that some of these fairly simple practices can have, not only on mental health, but physical health as well.
This is a side note about, this just popped into mind, about natural remedies potentially for something such as Lyme.
Yeah.
I've interviewed several people that had Lyme, including Trevor Hall, the musician here in town.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing this one guy named Matt from Sedona, and he was saying he tried everything. The thing that was most effective by far was Bee Venom Therapy. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah. We used to do Bee Venom Therapy in the clinic. We're not doing it currently because there have been some advents and some other therapies that are quite effective. But and that has a long tradition too, apitherapy or Bee Venom Therapy, and there are studies that show that beekeepers have really low IgE levels, which are like allergic responses, and really high IgG levels, which are protective against infections.
I would also say really high IQs.
Yeah.
I also know a lot of beekeepers, and if I'm going to be judgmental and stereotypical, they seem to be some of the smartest people I know.
Yeah, so there's some things for sure to to Bee Venom Therapy, and I trained with Dr. Klinghardt, who's done a lot with Bee Venom Therapy as well.
Oh, cool. That's something to look into. Dr. Klinghardt.
Klinghardt, yeah.
How do you tell the difference between just fixing an illness and actually getting your full energy back?
Yeah, so this is great because this creates this idea of a spectrum. There's a spectrum. And there's a spectrum from, if we just look at disease, if you're diseased or not diseased, it's like this much of the spectrum that's this big, right? There's a lot of path from optimally healthy to beginning of disease and then progression of disease. So if we're only looking at disease, we're only looking at a small part of a very large spectrum. And this is especially important when it comes to longevity and health span, because what we know is that, for example, they did a study on, it was in a war-torn area, and they had a lot of young people dying, and they were looking on autopsy at the plaque. Well, they were looking at what's called fatty streaks, which is a precursor to plaque. And they were finding in 15 to 19-year-olds, there was already fatty streaks in most cases, meaning atherosclerosis, heart disease, begins often when people are quite young. In childhood, it starts. Now, it takes a very long time to get to the point of a cardiovascular event. And this is really close to my heart because my father passed on when I was 15, suddenly and unexpectedly, from a cardiovascular event. And this, unfortunately, is sometimes the first symptom, is an event. And that event can be fatal. And so it's really important to look at the spectrum from, and now we have diagnostic imaging, so we can do a coronary CT angiogram, and we can use AI analysis on it. And that AI analysis is called Clearly, can show us, so I have pictures of my arteries, and it shows me where there's a little bit of plaque and whether there's occlusion of the blood flow and exact percentage of occlusion of the blood flow. I know the square millimeters of plaque that are in this from here to here from this AI analysis, and I track that not because I'm anywhere close to having an issue with a cardiovascular event, but because I want to know when the process starts. And so even though I'm like 0.2% plaque, which you don't even hit phase 2 of atherosclerosis until 15% plaque, my goal is to go from 0.2 to 0, or at least if I can, or stop it from going up. And that is a very different approach because you'd never get that screen typically at my age. No one would ever order that unless you're in this context of really looking at optimal function, because there's no signs of disease process that would warrant looking deeper in that way. Same thing for metabolic health. I have a continuous glucose monitor on now. I like to look at my blood sugar. I like to look at it not because I have diabetes, but because I want to know how close am I to the studies on young, healthy people's metabolic responses to foods. And can I take my 40-year-old metabolism and bring it closer to a 20-year-old's metabolism? And this is a very different perspective than waiting until there's disease.
That's pretty profound. You have 40 years on you?
Yeah.
When's your birthday?
June 12th.
Oh, I'm 11 days older than you.
Oh, wow.
Where were you born?
Arizona.
Okay,
Tucson.
I was born in Miami.
Yeah.
That's pretty close right there.
Yeah.
All right. We're crunching on time here. Okay, so facing an invisible illness like Lyme or mold, and you were told everything was fine by conventional doctors. What's one thing you wish these type of doctors would stop saying to people who are exhausted and seeking answers?
Well, I wish they would stop referring to psychiatric when they can't figure it out, and to have a little humility about that. It might just be that they can't figure it out, and that there might be something going on physiologically, and it's not just psychosomatic. That's probably number one, because I can't tell you how many people. I mean, this woman who was in yesterday had these mini strokes and landed in the hospital, but she's 32, and they're like, go home. There's nothing wrong. And to tell a person that, when she was in my office, her speech was slurred. It was very clear. She has aspirations to do really big things in life. She's doing great work in the world, purpose work in the world, and yet she's struggling to get through her day, and she's being completely dismissed. And this happens all the time.
And that's a pretty good point. So when doctors are at a loss, you're saying a lot of them might resort to psychiatrics.
Yeah.
All right. How does someone get off benzodiazepines? I'm not currently on them, but I know people that are, and I'm like, that one sounds pretty gnarly.
Yeah, not cold turkey.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Turkey. Yeah. I mean, there are some resources that help to guide people through that. There are clinics that specialize in benzo weaning. Don't try and do it alone. Okay. Get a professional to help. But say, I'm dedicated to getting off this. If you are, say, I want to get off this. I'm looking for someone who can help guide the wean. And that's important.
Here's totally left field now. Now we're doing popcorn style, intuitively, and preloaded ones. What about young girls, like teenagers that get on birth control?
Yeah.
And then they want to get off.
Yeah.
Like when they're older, not even to have a baby, but just to feel themselves.
Yeah.
Do you deal with patients? Is this something you've dealt with?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, birth control, it it's a synthetic hormone that blocks the endogenous production of hormones that controls the cycle, and there's crazy history to this. I mean, I won't go into it, but it's pretty horrible.
If someone wants to look into it, how do they look into it?
The eugenics movement.
Okay. Eugenics and birth control.
Yeah, and there was testing done against people's knowledge without them being aware. It's pretty bad. But we'll just say that bioidentical hormones are great for people who need hormones, and then there are birth control methods that aren't. The birth control pill that are very, very effective, like copper IUDs, that are non-hormonal. So there are options for women.
Have you heard of anyone dealing with being on birth control at a young age, and then when they got off, say in their mid-20s, and they're not getting their period?
Yeah.
What does that mean, or what do they do?
Yeah, so it can take at least 3 cycles, but if after a few cycles it's still an issue, then some support would be helpful. And functional medicine's great at digging into the support that might be helpful. There might be underlying gut issues. There might be other things that are preventing the body from re-regulating those hormones. So there's a lot of solutions there. There are herbal formulations that can help within the Chinese medicine tradition as well. Some fantastic and very effective herbal formulations. Like Free and Easy Wander is one of them that is quite effective, that we'll use in the clinic a lot when women are struggling to get their cycle back.
All right, we're opening all kinds of cans here. So you built a clinic and an institute. What's the biggest leadership lesson you learned when you went from helping individual patients to training hundreds of practitioners?
Well, for me, it's storytelling. Storytelling has been the biggest, because it's so. I go to all these conferences for providers, professional education conferences, and it's so easy for the talks to be so boring. And then it's hard to learn. It's hard to learn when it's boring, because we can take. For me, it's been able to take this complex, physiologic, biochemical types of things that we're trying to train people on and putting them into story, putting them into ways that people can engage and be able to understand, and it's fun to learn. I mean, learning is so much better when it's fun. When people are having fun, they learn so much better than when it's dry and boring.
Boom. Time's ticking here. That was a great answer. Thank you. If your body could have spoken to you when you were at your worst fatigue, what do you think it would have said? And how do you listen to your body differently now?
One of the things that is really important that I learned is that there's something called homeostasis. And I think a lot of people understand homeostasis as this ability to stay in a tightly controlled place, and the body has this homeostatic mechanism. This is part of why weight loss is so hard. When people gain weight, they have a homeostatic mechanism. They have a baseline where when they start to lose weight, the body comes back to the weight that's higher, and it gets really challenging for people to actually create a new baseline at a lower level. And a lot of people talk about listen to your body. And what I learned is listen to my body when it's in balance. Do not listen when it's out of balance necessarily. Don't ignore it, but also there's this homeostatic mechanism where the body out of balance wants to stay out of balance. The body in balance wants to stay in balance. And so there's this, for me, the listening to my heart and having my heart guide my mind, my body, and really looking at what are the hard choices to make that I feel intuitively in my heart would be important to do, even if everything in my body or mind screams no. If it's in my heart, then I follow that. And that's probably the most important. And you could say that's part of the body. I experience it a little more energetically than that. But something about there's this capacity to be, just like this person was lying to you, I think there's the capacity for the body to have this impetus to keep people out of balance. And if you have a craving, you don't just give in to the craving. You really look at what's in your heart, where are you going, what's the bigger mission, the bigger purpose, the bigger picture, and follow that rather than the short term of what might instinctually feel right in the moment.
Amen. So you mix mindset and meditation with real science. What's one everyday habit or physical change you noticed once you really believed the mind is a key part of healing?
I want to caveat this with saying that I totally underappreciated environment and thought mind could overcome environment. And it's not that it can't to an extent. There are a lot of people who their mindset makes for greater reactivity to the environment that they're in, but there's also this capacity for people to mind over body, mind over environment, mind over matter that really actually is a disservice in some cases. And what I recognized is that environment plays a tremendous role, and mind, it's, good luck with using your mind to get over a B12 deficiency, let's say, right? So there are things that are really important that can go together with some humility. And what I mean by that is it's really important from mindset, my perspective, that's been really valuable to me is to accept and embrace what is as it is. And that includes if I'm fatigued, if I'm experiencing brain fog, if I'm having a struggle in life, if I'm experiencing a lot of stress, to accept and embrace that, and to also be proactive, to also look for things externally as well. There's this, some people lock in on the externals and ignore the internals. Some people lock in on the internals and ignore the externals. For me, it's really being open to both and really looking at the mind-body as one continuum of a co-arising. And what arises in the mind co-arises with the environment. And there's this, there's a physiology, psychology co-arising, and then there's an environment and relationship co-arising. And so to be able to avoid the temptation to be reductionistic into internal versus external, mind versus environment, and to be broad enough to embrace that while the mind, you have some control in the moment of the mind as it is able to relate to the environment also impacts the mind in a tremendous way. And that has been a really important lesson to me, and something that I help people to embrace in the healing process.
I'm excited to re-listen to what you just said. That was a great explanation. So you've created this healing space for others. What's one thing you absolutely won't compromise on your clinic's culture, and how did your own journey shape that value?
One thing is the personalization and customization to the individual. It is tempting for a business perspective to can protocols and to just say, you're going through the detox, you're going through the whatever program that we've pre-designed, because it's a heck of a lot easier to do.
It's more scalable.
It's way more scalable. But continually, no matter the business advice that I get, no matter what I see other providers and clinics that are successful doing, I won't compromise on the personalization and customization to the individual, which means we have way too many accounts with way too many different lab companies and way too many different supplement companies, and inventory's a mess, and it creates all kinds of problems in the clinic, but we won't compromise on that. That is key, to really listen deeply to someone and to be collaborative together with them, and not to tell them you're just doing our protocol, but to say, hey, we're in this together. I'm going to be a guide. You're the final decision maker. It's your body. I'm your guide. I'm your professional guide. And we're only going to be successful if you're going to take action. And we have that conversation. And then we're really looking at a lot of individualized markers, individualized protocols, tweaking, honing, refining. It's a lot of work, but we won't compromise on that.
Thank you. Right on. It's 2:15. You want to take a picture of us real quick while we're sitting here? We can look at you. What's the best place for people to follow you? At the website, or do you have social media?
We have social. It's not very active. Website's the best. We do a blog that's really top-notch blog, free to access on the website, medicinewithheart.com. Put a lot of time, energy, and effort to researching fantastic blog articles. Highly recommend go check out the medicinewithheart.com blog and get engaged there. And then if you want to find out about the clinic, there's a place to book a call with staff in the clinic, and they'll help point you in the direction, whether it's our or someone else's work that would be most beneficial to you. Their staff is great at helping to work with people to understand what next step in their health journey might be helpful to them.
Thank you. I'm going to sign this book for you. Do you have time for one last question? Yeah. You mentioned losing your father and how that shaped your path.
Yeah.
How did that grief become a fuel for your work rather than just a wound?
So my father had conventional medical training, so he had the top of the top, Stanford Medical School, Harvard Master in Public Health, and yet he passed on suddenly and unexpectedly, and we didn't see it coming. And that threw me for a big loop, but it also got me asking a lot of questions about what was missing from that medical education, about what kinds of things can be done more proactively and preventively, what kinds of assessments can we make before there are symptoms that are occurring or obvious to people. And it really shaped also an understanding of stress and how much stress plays a role. Because he was a state senator at the time, and he directed a rural health office that the rural health office was giving him slack for having both positions, and he was getting a lot of pressure. There was a lot of stress. He tried to pass this piece of legislation that he couldn't in the Senate, so he was doing it through an initiative on the ballot, and then that got suppressed. There was all this stuff going on that was incredibly high pressure, high stress at the time. So it also got me paying a heck of a lot of attention to how do I work with stress so that I don't have that happen to my family, and that other people I can help too to not have that kind of tragedy happen in their families.
Well, thank you, man. You're definitely walking the talk. I definitely feel that you are letting your heart guide your way. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, one last thing, which is we talked about the perspective on health, from optimal health to disease beginning to disease ending, but we didn't talk on the mental health side about that. And from my perspective, because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm good, but what is good and what's possible and what's optimal on the perspective of mental health? And from that, I want to say that what I believe to be optimal health from the perspective, I wouldn't even say optimal, but what I believe is that if there's not a lot of love, if there's not a sense of purpose, if there's not an incredible capacity to be really loving life, like really loving life, then there's room to go towards that. And what I believe is the natural state is heart open, so much love internally, feeling like I'm good for me, and my energy and efforts are to support the world, to support growth, to support the earth. And of course, part of that means I have to support myself and self-care, and that's really important too. If people aren't experiencing that level of not only accepting what is, but really embracing and feeling profound love, there's room there. There's room there to get more towards what I believe to be the natural state, but that's been lost in the world today for so many.
Man, thank you. I'm excited to potentially get you back on the show. You don't have your own podcast yet?
No, I do a lot of interviews, but time will come soon for that.
Yeah, there might be room for more.
Yeah.
Keep breaking normal, y'all. Leave a review on this episode. I loved it. What did you think? See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.